I welcome you to Inovare. Yeah, this is where we innovate. This is the podcast where changes are made. If you're not growing, then you're dying. Innovation is the key to surviving. This is Inovare, where we ain't scared to make that change and create a new way. If you're ready to learn and sit back and just chill, it's about to get real. This is Inovare.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Inovare podcast. Yes, it's a wonderful place to be. This week we have I tell you what, man, we talk a lot about methodology on this show. We talk a lot about theories. We talk a lot about, we talk a lot about a lot. So, but this week we're going to break a lot of it down, and we're going to prove to you that all this talk that we've been doing and all these big words we've been throwing around, they're not scary. They're not scary at all. And we have a guy named Jim Vasconcellos in. He's a senior consultant with over 25 years of hands-on experience in strategic planning, business development, project management, technology implementation, process design, and development of programs that leverage technology for organizational change. Jim began his life in the Air Force as an intelligence collection officer, and he holds a Master of Science in Systems Management from the University of Southern California. Welcome on into the Inovare podcast, Jim Vasconcellos. Jim, how we doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you, Roy?
I'm doing good. I tell you what, we were talking about this in the pre-show that I am terrible with words, and so to talk about theories, let's try to keep the words that I have to read to a minimum here, because
All right.
I'm bad with words. Linguistics is not my strong suit. So
yeah.
So that's a mouthful that you've done. So 25 years of hands-on experience and all these different things in the Air Force.
Oh yeah.
You got a master's degree. Yep. That's quite the experience, man. So let's talk about your story and how you navigated through those years.
Well, I grew up like most kids. If everybody became their heroes, I wanted to be a pilot. That's why I went into the Air Force, and that didn't quite work out. So they said, you can get out or you can pick another career field, and they let me become an intelligence officer. But I'd always been interested in, since I started in ROTC, what does it take to create an organization that people want to go to work for and feel like they're contributing and doing something bigger than themselves. So I'd always been interested in management and leadership. And as an Air Force officer, leadership's kind of a big deal, so they teach us a lot about it. But one thing, the best leadership lesson that I ever learned was in the Air Force. At my first job, I had been there about a year, and they decided to make me, put me in charge of a facility that they were upgrading the service capabilities of, and those upgrades required an officer to run it. And I went in there, and the guy who was running it before me was a Chief Master Sergeant, highest enlisted rank in the Air Force. And he had 27 years of experience. And I knew going in that, even though I outranked him, he knew everything. I wasn't going to, tell him much. So I was going to ask. And the first day he sat me down and said, "Sir, I want to ask you a question." I said, "What's that, Chief?" He said, "If the commander wanted you to put up a flagpole, what would you do?" And so I started answering it like it was an engineering problem. I'd measure the flagpole, I'd dig just deep a hole. And no, that's not what you do, sir. And I said, "Okay, Chief, what would I do?" And he said, "You'd come to me and say, 'Chief, the commander wants the flagpole put up.' And then I'd turn to the sergeant and say, 'Sergeant, dig a hole there, this deep.'" And I said, "Okay, I got it." And that was the best lesson on leadership that I ever learned. It was, I have a job to do. Know where it ends, know where my people's jobs begin. Let them do theirs. And in order to make them successful, get them what they need. And somebody decided that they were qualified to do those jobs before I got there. So you got to kind of trust that system. And, take care of your people.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I've been studying leadership since 1979, and I have not found anything, including in my doctoral research, that contradicts any of that. None of the newest thinking, nothing changed that. And I've been working under that that idea ever since. So
yeah,
that was
a tough lesson, you know. Because you want to get your hands dirty, right? You want to start in, and when you don't have that trust and micromanagement gets in, and you get all these other, you want to do it, right? And then, but that's one of the hardest lessons to learn being an entrepreneur in business, life, whatever, is to let people do what they're good at, right?
Yeah, and especially, give up the authority to do things. You never give up responsibility. You delegate authority. Because as the leader, the buck stops with you. So that was the biggest thing that I took away from the Air Force, honestly. A lot of other different things along the way. As an intelligence collection officer, my job was to talk to people and get information out of them. And so I had to learn a lot about, current affairs, political science, human behavior, sociology, all of those types of things that give me the context and the knowledge for interrogating and debriefing people. So,
wow. So that's that's sitting people underneath like they see in the movies. You got the lights staring at them and that kind of thing. Kinda.
And no, I never waterboarded anyone.
Yeah. Is this one of those you can't tell me kind of things? You have to kill me.
No, kind of, not really. But if you want to get a really good idea of how these things work and how they're supposed to work, the movie that is come out on, I think it's on Amazon, is the Report, and it talks about all the special interrogation techniques and stuff, and it'll surprise and scare you a little bit, but it's a good movie.
I'm gonna have to check that out. So
yeah.
So you're actually not the first military person that I've had on this show. I've had a few different ones, and they all speak about the same thing whenever I bring up the military, because it's an easy place to start as a host, right? Is to say, hey, you got military experience, tell me about it, and they all talk about teamwork. One of them brought up leading from the front. A lot of the different things. Somebody talked about how you couldn't go to the bathroom without a buddy, and it was just this teamwork aspect that the military preaches, which is pretty obvious, right? I mean, as a civilian, you think about teamwork and you think about the military. I mean, some people might think about the NFL or whatever, one of their favorite teams, but nobody does the type of stuff the military does every day.
Yeah, and another thing about the military is a lot of people think, command and control. Yeah, there's command and control that's necessary to execute certain things, but we generally want people to be self-starters, innovators, not necessarily innovators, but able to take the initiative on their own because they know what the mission is and they know how to get it done in the absence of structured leadership, in the absence of somebody telling them what specifically to do. So, you don't have to be ordered to return fire.
Right. Yeah. And so all of this led you to a Master of Science in Systems Management. And so before I pretend to know what that means, why don't you tell everybody listening so that they know what we know?
Well, systems management is using systems theory as an approach to solving organizational issues. Most people think IT when they hear that, but it's actually using systems theory. I did use a lot of I did apply a lot of the theory to systems architecture and projects and stuff, doing technical projects, but it's about solving problems basically.
Okay. And so from that, we talk a lot about theories on this show. So all around methodologies that I like to use are all about solving problems, like you just mentioned. One that I really like is the agile methodology. I'm a big agile nerd. And you talk about systems theory a lot. So tell me a little bit about systems theory.
Okay, well, one of the things that a lot of corporations used to do was what's called benchmarking. So you benchmark and you analyze. And let's say you're going to build a corporation by doing that. And you say, well, who's got the world class sales? Well, Microsoft. Okay, who's got the world class distribution? I don't know, maybe you'd say Ingram Micro. Who's got whatever finance department? Look at, let's say, Wells Fargo Bank. And then you model your departments after those departments. The problem is that's not a systems view. The systems view would be different. And the example is if you tried to build a car by benchmarking, if you said, well, who's got the best engine? Oh, well, the best engine is built by Rolls-Royce. And the best transmission, that's Chrysler. And who makes the best chassis? General Motors. And so you go get a General Motors chassis, a Chrysler transmission, and a Rolls-Royce engine. And what happens when you try to put them together? They don't fit.
Right.
So you can't make a car that way. You can't make a system that way. You have to understand the relationships between the pieces, and that's what systems theory does. It looks at how information and processes and interactions flow, and it focuses on those relationships. And if you want to understand an organization, it's basically the relationships are the lifeblood of the organization. It's how people interact, it's how systems interact, and it's where those breakdowns occur. And there's all kinds of ways to define those systems and model them. So that's the big picture of it.
Okay, so are you trying to use that example of the cars? So I have the Rolls-Royce engine. So obviously, like to use your example, I can't make a Rolls-Royce engine fit with a Chevy transmission. So am I trying to reinvent the Rolls-Royce engine, or?
Well, you can work at creating the whole engine from scratch, or you could work at making the interface between those two parts fit together, coming up with some kind of adapter or designing how that relationship is going to work better.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of approaches you can take within that.
And so you mentioned people. So are when we talk about those adapters and making them interface, is that people and processes, or what's the interface there when we get into business?
Well, communication's always a big one. And if you look at what the word communicates, it actually means fitting together, and coming together in communion, communicating. And so understanding how those things happen and where the breakdowns can occur are very important. And you also want to look at understanding not just those relationships, but the prior and after relationships. And so you can understand the second and third order effects of what changes will create, not just in that process or in that system, but with that system in the environment, with the larger systems that you're talking about. So there's a whole different way of viewing things rather than looking at how the pieces work individually.
Interesting. And so you always say theories aren't scary.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of what we've had multiple talks, and so that seems to be a recurring thing where you tell me I'm not supposed to be afraid, so I'll believe you. So why aren't theories scary?
Well, a lot of people, especially in business, say, I don't want to deal with theory. I just want practical knowledge that I can apply now. But we live in theories. We don't live in a reality, really, because we filter everything through our biology, and we interpret what we understand, and we assign names to things, and basically we create frameworks for how we view the world. And each framework allows us to do certain things, but more importantly, it prevents us from doing other things. Okay, so if you're only looking through the west window of your house, you're only going to see what's out that window. But if you want to understand things better, go up on the roof and you got a 360-degree view. So what you see limits what you can act upon, and how you interpret what you see limits how you can act. So the idea is, if you can, open your mind up and just realize that you're using a framework to observe what you're looking at, and knowing that there's other frameworks to use, maybe some of those other frameworks could allow you to do different things. That's the whole idea.
So it's perception.
Perception, yeah, that's a big part of it.
And so that gets into the podcast title of "The Map is Not the Terrain," right? And so break that down for me before we get into it.
So maps represent a picture of the terrain, and there's different kinds of maps. For example, a map to navigate from your house to McDonald's, you're using GPS on your phone. It just basically shows you a depiction of what the roads look like. It doesn't show you a lot of detail. It just shows you keep going this direction. But that's all you need to get where you're going. Now, if you were going to do geology work, your GPS, just a GPS map on your phone might not be sufficient for you to understand what's going on in the terrain. So you'd get something from the U.S. Geological Survey maybe to help you understand what's going on. If you were going on a hike, you'd want a topographical map. It shows you the different elevations, so you know, well, it's winter here and it might rain today, so this is the low area. I don't want to be here in case it's a flash flood, because you can tell that by the lines on the map. So the maps allow you to navigate the terrain for whatever purpose you have for navigating that terrain, but they aren't the terrain. And that's basically the same thing about theories. Theories are not reality. So if you want to navigate differently in reality, try a different theory.
Right. Pick what works for you, kind of a thing. First off, we're not all attempting to do the same thing. So
exactly.
So to try and fit one methodology or one theory into the box, well, we're all in a different box. So
right. Yeah, and for leadership, this comes down to figuring out what works for you and your people, because you know your situation, you know your team better than any guru or consultant is going to come in. The only thing they're going to bring to you is a different theory, and take what works, leave what doesn't.
And so when we get into that, when we get into people, there's the theory that fits the people, and then there's the people that fit the theory. And so if we're building a team, are we building? Are we taking the theory to fit the people, or are we looking for people to fit the theory?
Well, it's a little bit of both, I would say. If you're starting from scratch, it's probably more finding people to fit the theory. If you are building a team from, a team of 4 or 5 out of the 30 or 40 employees in your organization, you've got what you've got, right? So it's a little bit of both. And the thing about it is, if you are clear and can articulate these theories and what you're looking for and what roles people will fill, then they can work within that framework. Some may be better in some areas than others. There's always going to be give and take, but, as long as you communicate, it's not that difficult.
I feel like communication is the ultimate Band-Aid, right? It's where, and I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a way that it covers things up. I mean it in a good way, where if you over communicate, you can solve a lot of problems. Right? A lot of problems can be solved just by saying and keeping your end client, your team, whatever it is, completely in the loop.
Right. one key factor, though, I think I want to throw in here about systems management and systems theories, it kind of departs from what's got us where we are today, in that everything that we've learned has been sort of from a mechanistic viewpoint. You know, force equals, work is force equals ma, mass times acceleration. Work is about moving things and manipulating things and changing things. But people interact a little differently than that. They're not cogs in the machine. They come with moods and thoughts and beliefs, and all of those can change and all of those can affect what's going on. So we need to look at communication in a way that involves all of those things, especially if we're trying to build trust, because we have these interpretations and understandings that we just have because of our history. And it's not, I formulate an idea in my head, I put it into words, and then you hear the words, and then you formulate that same picture. It doesn't work that way, because there's a lot of stuff that's in our background and in our history that communicates without saying anything. And I'm not talking about body language. I'm talking about just preconceived understandings of meaning. Like if you came to my house and asked me for some water, and I said, yeah, go ahead and go into it's in the refrigerator, you'd expect to find what?
Maybe a bottle of water.
Right. But if you open the door and there's no bottles of water, there's not a pitcher of water, there's not anything in there, and you turn to me and say, hey, I thought you said there's water in there. And I say, oh yeah, there's water in the defrosting system, there's water in the vegetables that are in the vegetable bin, there's water everywhere. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's not how we communicate. You understood that when I said there's water in the fridge, that I meant that there's water that you can grab and start drinking, because I understood that when you asked me for water that you were thirsty. But none of that was talked about.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. So we don't communicate like, you decode you encode a message, send it, and then decode it. It's not ones and zeros going across the network. There's a lot of nuance and understanding, and you can understand this to be true if you studied a foreign language.
Yeah.
Idiomatic expressions are different. And if if you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah.
Right. If you said that to somebody in their language, they'd look at you like you were nuts. Right. Okay, because it's an idiom. So
yeah,
that's something that a lot of people need to think about when they speak.
Yeah. And a lot of the things that we speak, or that we communicate, rather, not that we speak, but that we communicate, is nonverbals, right? Whereas
that's true too.
I think it's something like 80% of the messages that we deliver are nonverbals, and then the voice, the speak, is more to just over communicate to accentuate what it is that we want, right? We're like, hey, if I'm throwing my shoulders around and I'm all like, that's where we get into those. My dad always uses this example, right? He says, you can say two different sentences that are the exact same words. And so he always uses, let's talk turkey, or let's talk turkey. And one could mean, let's talk about Thanksgiving. And the other could mean, we have to talk because you're a turkey, which, turkey.
Yeah.
Not maybe the young ones don't understand that turkey.
Yeah,
turkey
so 1980s.
That's right. But my dad used to say that to me all the time, was how you enunciate, how you say things, or the way that you're standing, or you crossing your arms, whatever it is, means so much more in the way they communicate. And so that gets into understanding your people, right, and how they communicate, which I assume the more that you understand about your people and how they think, how they act, how they communicate, the more that you can narrow down the right system.
Right. And you can use that knowledge to be sure that you're clear when you speak, and pay attention. There's also an old saying that says the meaning of your message is the response that you get. So if you say something and you're expecting them to be happy about the news and they frown when you say it, maybe you didn't communicate it properly. Right?
That's a leadership tactic. That's a tough one to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first
responsibility
of being a good leader is knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Of course.
Totally.
Yeah.
You can't direct others if you don't know yourself.
No. No. Yeah.
And so, I know we didn't talk about this, and so I'm going to throw it at you.
Mm-hmm.
But so when we get into how teams communicate, so I've gotten into things.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we're both been in and around the federal government, and so the government. When I actually worked for the government for about 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
I was a federal employee, and they did
Mm-hmm.
something that I became an instructor of called DISC. Have you ever heard of DISC?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
And so these DISC, for those of you listening who don't know what DISC is, it's an assessment that members take, and it tells them how they think and who they are. And so there's different assessments, right? There's dominant, there's I forget the rest of them, right? Scientific and everything, and so you can change the way your personality is in different scenarios. Like I could be an I at work, or I could be a C at church. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And so how important is it to understand the personalities of your employees?
It's a really good idea to do something. I don't know if it necessarily has to be DISC. A lot of people use Enneagram. A lot of people use True Colors. A lot of people use the Myers-Briggs. They're all, again, frameworks for observation. They're not the terrain, right? So they give you an idea about how to interact and how to navigate with people, but they're not perfect. So use them, but they'll be inadequate at sometimes.
Yeah. And so how many maps do we
that's
need?
Okay. Whichever one that works for whichever purpose you're engaging in at the time.
Yeah. So there's no one shoe fits all?
No, there's no one answer. There's no one universal theory of life. and that's as it should be, because we evolve, we change. Human concerns have shifted greatly in the last 10 years. I mean, we used to not be concerned with people bumping into things because they're looking at their phone all the time.
Right.
But we've got a lot of new concerns because we have new technologies and new ways of interacting.
Yeah. How about a handshake? I've never been so scared to shake somebody's hand these days, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
and then it was people doing fist bumps,
that's
and
right.
now it's 6 feet away and wave, right?
That's right.
So how we interact is driven by a lot of outside forces, and we've just got to roll with them, you know.
All right, so here's the new question that I've been asking everybody before they go. And so that is, the podcast title is Inovare, which means, or Inovare, however you want to pronounce it, which means innovation. And so how can we use theories and how can we use what we've talked about today to innovate either ourselves or our business?
Well, it's a matter of observing yourself and looking at what theory you're acting out of, what framework, and looking at are there any limitations in the assumptions here? Are these assumptions accurate? And what if my assumptions are wrong? And start using some critical thinking there to step back and open up channels for greater creativity by using different assumptions and different theories to view what you're doing. And
I love that. Our conversation has been about there's no right answer, right? Because when anyone is starting out, you could be in your personal life. You could be an entrepreneur. This could be business, whatever it is. It's okay to look to others for answers, but that doesn't mean that person has the right answer just because they were successful. Because you're going to be different, right?
Yeah, and you're going to be different. You're going to view terms differently. You know, like what is leadership?
Yeah.
You know, your definition is different than mine. So
totally. Yeah, I have a brother. I don't know if you have a sibling, but I have a brother.
Yeah,
and
two.
Oh, nice. So I'm sure we're going to have a similar story then here, then, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a little brother. We're a year and a half apart,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just actually talking to him right on the little while before we started this recording, talking about his story, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And his story, and he tells me, and I'm like, "Wow." Like, we're a year and a half apart, grew up in the same household, same parents, went to the same schools, but we have a completely different perception of what our realities were. And
Absolutely.
people don't think that. People think, oh, well, you're from the same area I'm from, or you went to
Mm-hmm.
the same school I went to, and
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't always work that way. And so that's where I'm glad we had this talk about different theories, right? The map is not the terrain, guys. So whatever
Yep.
it is that you're working towards, working through, make sure that you're picking what works for where you're headed. So Jim, if people want to continue to have this conversation, which I think is an awesome one, how do they reach you?
The best way is on LinkedIn. Just www.linkedin.in/Jim, Jim Vasconcellos, V as in Victor, Asconcellos. That's the best way to get in touch with me.
Nice. And I will drop that link in the show notes so everybody can click on it and go find my man Jim on the LinkedIn. Well, Jim, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for hopping on. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks, Roy. I had a blast.
Awesome. Well, guys, there we go. There is another one in the books, guys. We did another episode. We made it. And so, speaking of maps, go download the mind map. It might not be the only map you ever use, and that's okay, but it'll be a map that you can use, and I made it, so that's fun too. And if you want to listen to how to go through it, you can go to our Agile. We did a whole podcast on it. There's an Agile methodology podcast where we break it down. We talk about epics. We talk about it all. So go ahead and download that. You can listen to all our podcasts, this one included, on iTunes, Spotify, whatever. We're on 9 different platforms. That's a lot. We're even on YouTube. So check that out, guys. And until next time, see ya.